Tiger Woods has stepped in it again. On Memorial Day weekend, Tiger was found sleeping in his car on the side of a Florida highway. He was high as a kite. He blamed the intoxication on prescription drugs, a negative reaction to a combustible mixture of prescription drugs I guess he was taking. It's obviously not the first time he's ended up by the side of the road in a crashed car, high on prescription drugs. He blamed the 2009 crash after his blow-up with Elin over his adultery. He blamed that on the fact that he was high on Ambien. There were other reports that I guess were disproven to some degree that Elin had caused the accident by attacking him with a golf club. I think they both denied that it happened. Instead, he said, despite after the fight, he ran out, he was high on Ambien, and he crashed into the tree. So he's had this issue before where he's crashed on prescription drugs. We say crashed because when he was found on the side of the road, the car was busted up pretty good. The fender was dented, the taillights were out, the two of the tires were, I guess, dislodged in some way from the car. Could have been a really serious accident. We don't know exactly at this point what he crashed into. Hopefully we're going to find that out soon. But what we do know is that this is yet another step in the downward spiral that has been Tiger Woods' career since the 2009 incident with Elin. He hasn't won a tournament in 4 years. He hasn't won a major in 9 years. The man who was once the greatest athlete in any sport ever, perhaps, has seen his life fall apart, and now we're going to talk a little bit about whether or not it's going to make his family fall apart as well.
Are we going to talk about the smile you've had on your face while describing his downfall as well?
I'm Jason Beckerman.
And I'm Derek Kaufman.
And this is Behind the Bar.
Before we get started, for those of you who are listening, Jason has just described this. If this is only on a podcast, you hear his somber tones. He puts on his full Walter Cronkite and just gives you sort of the details about this harrowing tale of a guy's busted up car and being passed out in his car. He has what can only be described as a shit-eating grin on his face. And I want to know why, Jason. I want to know why you take such perverse glee in Tiger's
I don't
downfall.
take perverse glee. I mean, this guy was my favorite golfer. I loved him. I played golf at the time when he was big, and I followed him every week, and I rooted for him every week, and I was happy for his successes, totally happy.
I feel a butt coming on.
I just think that I've learned a lot about him over the last 4 or 5 years, and I think that Tiger Woods is a really bad person. And Derek's setting me up because he knows I have sort of this screed prepared. The fact that he's a bad person has nothing to do with cheating. It has nothing to do with relationships with hookers or forcing the separation of his family. Lots of people are guilty of those kinds of things, and I'm not going to judge him for that. I have no idea what his relationship was like with his wife, and I'm not going to judge him for that at all. My feelings about him are instead based on the fact that he has been a world-class a-hole to his family, his friends, his caddies, golf course personnel, waitresses, little kids standing by the side of the golf course, and the media for the last 20 years. His former swing coach, Hank Haney, described him as, and I have this written down, selfish, cold, petty, and cheap. In a game built on decorum, he's made headlines for routinely slamming his clubs into the ground whenever he hits a bad shot, which wasn't often, erupting in profanity-laced tirades at himself and others with children in the stands, and even one time in 2009, and the media didn't really cover this. He hit a bad shot, he took his club, and he hurled it, sidewinded, into the crowd where it hit a number of people in the crowd. In 2013, he was accused by fellow golfer Sergio Garcia. Everybody loves Sergio Garcia. Accused by Sergio Garcia of distracting Garcia when he was in his backstroke. Tiger said, "Well, I was taking my clubs and rummaging around when it happened, but it's because the marshal the marshal is the golf course official had told me that Garcia had already hit." That gets back to the marshal. The marshal says, "What are you talking about? I never said that." Tiger insisted, and video confirmation came that they had never communicated. Tiger had made it up from whole cloth because he didn't like being held to task for having made this ruckus during Sergio's swing. The fun continued when Tiger later instructed his caddy to grab somebody in the audience's camera that he didn't like was making a clicking sound and actually throw it into a lake, which Tiger did. He is famous for poor tipping. There have been reports out that he has racked up bills as much as $4,000 at restaurants and left zero tip, not one penny in tip. And this is not one time. That's the most egregious example. But it is routinely reported that he has failed to put tips or tips 5%, 2% on enormous bills where he pays for his caddy and others in his entourage, but doesn't take care of the waitstaff. So I don't think it's too much of a stretch.
It's amazing we've gotten to poor tipping before you got to his ruthless infidelity infidelity towards Elin Nordgren.
I'm not going to judge him for the infidelity. That is what I hate to do that because I don't know what people's relationships are like, and it was an awful situation.
Even open relationships are rarely that open. That was a very open relationship.
Go bang the escorts is rarely something that even the open relationship allows.
Right.
Yeah.
There are usually terms to these.
Right. So, but putting that aside, so anyway, this is my feelings on Tiger Woods that have developed over the last few years. He went from somebody who was a hero to millions of kids and one of my sports heroes to somebody who I think has had not just a regrettable past since I've learned about all this stuff over the last 5 years, but a regrettable 20 years of a career that could have been so remarkable and has now fallen down. And it was a remarkable career, but has now fallen down to this morass. So anyway, let's bring it up to the present. Derek, give everybody the hits, runs, and errors. What happened here in this incident where he's found by the side of the road, intoxicated on prescription meds, his car battered, and he doesn't have much of an explanation to justify it.
Yeah, so we've got a lot of information now. There's a long police report. I'm going to give you some of the highlights. So on Memorial Day, early morning, on Monday morning at 2:09 in the morning, cops spot a car. It's partially pulled into the bike lane, sort of pulled over to the side. It's not moving at all. The cops go in to take a quick look. They notice it's Tiger Woods. And this car showed what they describe as fresh damage. So this is not a busted-up beater car. This is a car that was just in a sort of serious fender bender. The tires were flat. There's damage to the rims. There was damage to the front and side bumpers and rear bumper, and the rear tail light is up. So Tiger Woods hit something
how do you damage
on all
the
sides.
Front of the car? It's remarkable.
Yeah.
Front of the car and the back of the car, and two of the tires are completely busted up. It almost sounds like he drove into a ditch or something.
It sounds like there's a bumper car situation. I don't know if it was parallel parked. We haven't heard or seen of any other cars that were damaged in this. Maybe a car took off after Tiger
My
bumped
wife
him around.
is a bad parallel parker, but she's got nothing on Tiger Woods.
This is a lot.
Tiger Woods.
This is a lot.
Parking.
So they sort of tap on the window. He's entirely out of it. They first ask Tiger, hey, where are you coming from, sir? And he answers, L.A. I'm on my way to Orange County. Now, note, we're in Jupiter, Florida. So Tiger has a home on the East Coast, but he thinks he's in L.A. The officer persists and says, do you know where you are? Tiger says, I have no idea. So we have a very disoriented individual. He's asked to step out of the car. He said, have you had anything to drink tonight? Tiger's adamant, no. He's asked again. No, he hasn't had anything to drink. He said he hasn't had any illegal drugs, but we'll get to that later. So he exits his vehicle, and he starts going through some field sobriety tests. And he's a little unsteady on his feet. Throughout this police report, we see the word swaying constantly. Mm-hmm. So swaying is used when you want to describe someone who's not steady on their feet. He's swaying to such an extent that the officer says, would you like to remove your shoes? Mm-hmm. At which point, Tiger takes his shoes off and leaves them under the wheel of the officer's car, which is something you don't see every time in one of these reports. He goes through something called, so field sobriety tests are something we talk about constantly when we do these, but I want to get a little bit more specific. One of the chief field sobriety tests is called the Romberg alphabet. That's when you ask someone to recite the alphabet backwards, which I think is difficult. I think that's hard to do. They seem to give him the Romberg alphabet forwards and say, can you recite the alphabet, A to Z?
Well, it's not the Romberg alphabet anyway. So that's just the alphabet.
That's just the alphabet. Yeah. I like giving it Romberg. Give Romberg some credit. So they ask him, what's your highest level of education? He says, I was a sophomore in college. And they say, do you understand these instructions? Because before you give a test, before you administer it, you have to ask the person, do you understand what I've asked you to do, so that you can assess whether they perform it? He says to not sing the national anthem backwards. So he indicates that he clearly doesn't understand the Romberg alphabet or the regular alphabet for that matter, and he thinks singing the national anthem backwards was the task at hand, which is my favorite part of the whole story because that's
Sir,
difficult.
Say the alphabet. You want me to sing the national anthem backwards?
Yeah. Got it. God bless America in reverse. Ready? 2, 3, 4. So he then correctly recites the alphabet. That's the one win he gets out of this whole scenario. He's swaying on his feet. He misses his nose in the finger to nose test. He's swaying around. He can't walk straight.
So he fails the field sobriety test miserably. I mean, look, other people fail it too. He's not alone. But
this is a particularly egregious example. And it's one that Jason takes particular glee in watching all of these take place. So he gets.
I don't actually, because he could have killed.
That's true. It could have been a danger, but no one was hurt apparently that we've heard of,
except for the person who's trapped underneath the bumper of his car. Apparently,
except for the person who was dragged to the station.
Right.
So they take him back to the station, and he then performs 2 breathalyzer tests. So remember, he said he hadn't had a thing to drink. He blows twice, and he blows a 000, so out to 3 decimal places.
No alcohol,
0
at
alcohol.
all, which confirms what he had said before. And it is true. I mean, from everything we've heard, he does not drink much. That's right. Tiger's never been a drinker.
And those tests are very sensitive. If you swallow a little mouthwash, you're going to blow a .001.
It was a few hours later, so he could have had some alcohol, but he had not even a trace by that point. So he hadn't drank. We can all agree on that.
That's right. But to confirm that they're not, once you don't have any alcohol in your breath, they still want to take a urine test because he's obviously disoriented. So he's provided a urine sample. We haven't seen the results of that yet. But what he did say to the police were, in his interview, he says, "What kind of drugs do you take ordinarily?" And he listed 4 drugs. He listed something called Saloxex, Vicodin, Torix, and Vioxx. Most of these are anti-inflammatories except for Vicodin.
Vicodin, right?
Vicodin's a big painkiller.
And you're instructed not to drive when you're on Vicodin.
That's right. Anyone who's taken Vicodin when they've had sort of back injuries, I've taken it several times. I've had 2 back surgeries. You're out of it. And if you combine drugs, sometimes they have these adverse consequences even amplified. So that could have been what's going on here. Very sluggish and sleepy. And now Tiger. The pictures have come out. The car is really messed up.
Yeah.
You know, lot of damage. So we'll have to see
where this raises
goes.
A bunch of legal questions. Obviously, he has some legal peril for the driving while intoxicated. He hit something.
Yep.
We don't know what it is. Hopefully, it was not. It was just a single car accident where he drove into a ditch or hit a tree because he's okay. And hopefully, we're not going to find out that he actually struck something else and somebody else's property was harmed.
Because then you're going to raise maybe hit and run questions if it was far away and then he parks.
You will absolutely face
away.
hit and run questions. And the fact that he was intoxicated is not going to be a defense to those charges. God forbid. I mean, there hasn't been reports that anybody's been injured and presumably would have heard about that by now.
Right.
But God forbid something like that happens. So he does have legal jeopardy, and he will have to suffer. This is a first-time DUI, and he will have to suffer some sort of consequence as a result of that. Likely it's a misdemeanor charge he will plead to. He will do community service. Here in California, one of the things they insist upon is that you go and you work at the morgue. The idea is that if you see dead bodies, you'll be less likely to engage in this kind of activity.
It's like how they used to show you red asphalt when you went to driving school, that video where there's dead bodies all over the street.
Right.
Scared straight.
Scared straight. So I assume Florida has similar laws. I don't assume. I sort of looked up the fact that it's a misdemeanor charge, first-time offense, and so he's going to have some legal consequence. But there are other downstream consequences that Tiger Woods, I think, could and very likely will suffer as well.
Yeah, there's 2 big categories. First, Tiger has a lot of endorsements left. I thought that all of them fled after he divorced from Elin and has been, sort of playing very poorly.
He clawed some back, yeah.
He's got a ton. He's got, by most accounts, 7. He's got Nike Golf does his apparel, TaylorMade Golf does his clubs, Bridgestone does his golf balls. 3 different companies for different aspects of his golf game still, which is pretty poor. Yeah. He's also got Rolex for watches. He's got
pretty poor.
His golf game is pretty poor.
Oh, his golf game
is objectively terrible at this point.
Yeah.
Rolex. He's got a Japanese pharmaceutical company called Kawa, which is sort of they manufacture something that's akin to an icy hot. So I don't think that played a role here. Upper Deck Trading Cards and Hero Motor, an Indian motorcycle company. So he's got a lot. In his heyday, he was making $90 million a year. In 2016, he was still bringing in around half of that. $45.5 million is what I've seen. Less than half of what he's made, but still a healthy living. So he could lose some of those sponsors.
He could very well lose some, and it depends what comes out, right? I mean, here's the thing. I don't give, he says he had a negative reaction to his prescription meds. I reject that out of hand. Anytime you're taking Vicodin, you know better than get behind the wheel. He has, once again, had trouble at least one time before that we know about with driving well under prescription intoxicants. So he says he knows better. I don't like to give anybody, it's not just a Tiger Woods thing, I don't like to give anybody a pass for saying, boy, I didn't realize how buzzed I was, hammered I was when I got behind the wheel of that car.
And to that point, we did a story where his girlfriend his girlfriend currently was called during this incident and started screaming, "I knew it, I knew it." Now, you have a different interpretation of maybe what was going on, but it sounded to me like she had maybe warned him about taking these pills and feeling confident enough to drive, and maybe said, one of these days it's going to catch up with you, Tiger, and that might have been what prompted her to say, "I knew it." He's got other problems, right, Jason? I mean, Elin, he had 2 young young children.
So you recall after the divorce, the kids were Charlie and Sam, I believe their names are, very young when the divorce happened. They're obviously, I think, in their late, they're
6 and 7 now.
Are they only 6 and 7 now?
I think so. No, at the time maybe they were 6 and 7. Maybe they're older now.
Yeah, they're 9 and 8.
9 and 8. So I was
Charlie's
wrong.
8. The
apologies.
girl is 9.
So Charlie, they have 2 young children together. When they went through the divorce, Elin was quite good to Tiger Woods. She got $100 million out of him in the divorce settlement, but nevertheless, they share custody. By all accounts, he is a good and attentive father. Mm-hmm. We don't know how the relationship is now. They seem to co-parent relatively well, but they have very different lives. She would have all the grounds in the world based on this charge to go and try to get primary physical custody and maybe even sole physical custody, depending on what comes out, from Tiger Woods based on this offense. And I don't think it would be that difficult to put him through quite a bit to obtain greater rights to these children. You agree with that?
I agree completely, with one caveat. I think she's going to go in there, if she were so inclined, to say, look, this is not in the best interest of the children. He's out at all hours of the night. This happened at 2 a.m. He was clearly in some sort of car accident. This is going to endanger the children if there are ever children in the car. One thing Tiger has in his favor, I think, is that this looks like his first official offense. So he could go up to the judge and say, look, I made a terrible mistake, but I am a 40-something-year-old man. I've never had this in my past. It won't happen again. Please don't take my children away from me. If you look at this interview with Elin Nordgren, she says, I'm a wonderful father. All of a sudden, she's tacking left and saying that I'm a danger. Well, so really, let's reach some sort of compromise.
Two rejoinders. Number one, it has happened before, right? He claimed, whether you believe it or not, and a lot of people don't, that he was under the influence of Ambien, and that's what caused the accident in 2009. And also, let's assume for a second that that was true in 2009. What we have is we know of two instances where he is driven under intoxication, intoxicated by prescription drugs. In both times he ended up in an accident. It just doesn't stand to reason that he has never driven while under the influence of prescription drugs and not gotten into an accident. You would have to assume that he does it with some frequency.
Right.
I make that assumption. Now, I'm obviously biased in one direction, but I think that's a logical assumption to make. Not the courts rely on assumptions, but what they do rely on is witness testimony. What has the girlfriend who said, I knew this was going to happen, what's she going to testify to if Elin puts her to it to say, have you ever seen him do this before? Elin absolutely has the right to question her based on what she said and figure out what it is that she's seen. Does Elin know of other instances? Does the Jupiter Police Department know of other instances that didn't rise to the level of arrest?
This is a good point, Jason. And to your earlier screed, who's going to come in as a character witness? I'm sure Elin could line up people who say he's pompous, he's a pill popper, he does this all the time. This is just who Tiger is. He thinks he's untouchable. I could imagine a line of people who are willing to say negative things about his tendencies, his personality, and maybe his behavior in this regard. Maybe Tiger could find a few people who will say kind words, but I think he's going to have a hard time with credibility. I
do have some sympathy for him. I think that we've talked about this before. He had a very difficult upbringing. He had a broken home, and his father was very tough on him. But his father's toughness on him was what made him probably such a phenomenal golfer. I think that he was a big nerd until he got to college and became a professional, became the greatest golfer in the world. And then all of a sudden this fame was foisted upon him, or he earned it. And I don't think he necessarily knew how to deal with that. And I think that's troubled him for most of his life. And I've read a lot about this, so I'm not just speaking, sort of out of my ass on this thing. I think there's some merit to that.
I also think there's some depression. I mean, he has had two serious back surgeries, several knee surgeries, and this is a sport that requires a lot of torsion. I mean, golf doesn't sound like football or one of the contact sports, but it puts a lot of tax on your body.
And he is a shell of the golfer he once was, and he has admitted he has a very difficult time accepting the new reality of his golf game.
Yep.
What's that sound?
That sounds like mail time, Parker.
All right, mail time. Remember to write in your questions and comments to behindthebar@tmz.com. First one is from Kyle. So there's a story out there that Vili Falal filed for separation from Mary Kay Letourneau to get licensed for a business he wants to start, but he didn't want his wife's criminal record to show on a background check. If this turns out to be true, isn't this more of a problem for him?
So the other big story here, Jason, of the week, we had Tiger Woods. The other big story is Mary Kay Letourneau, who you remember served a 7-year sentence for child rape because she had a relationship with her student, Vili Falal, who was 13, I believe, at the time. She served her sentence. She got out. They ended up getting married in 2005. And now he filed for separation here in 2017 after a 12-year. I think we'd have to call that a successful marriage or a semi-successful marriage. There's a story that's floating around that Vili filed for separation because he wants to open a weed business. He wants to open an operation, and he's going through some licensing requirements, and he's worried that her criminal conviction will hurt his ability to get the license. This is a problem, though, isn't it?
So they live in the state of Washington together. Washington is a pot legal state, one of two totally pot legal states, I think.
I think that's right. You got Colorado,
District of Columbia, Colorado, and Washington State. And so, but there are restrictions.
Doesn't mean it's not regulated.
But
heavily.
They're heavily regulated. There are restrictions upon who can have a license, and one of the restrictions is if you're a convicted felon, which she is, you cannot have a license to sell weed. And so, I think to grow and to sell weed. He's married to her, so he would not. He's concerned that he would not be able to get a license to grow and sell weed based on his marriage to her. So the story going around is that he filed for separation in order to be able to do that.
Right, but the idea of the story is that he's fully intending to continue to cohabitate with and live as a married couple with Mary Kay, and simply filed these documents as a means of clearing the background check to get the pot license. That is a big problem, because if you are defrauding an agency in order to pass a licensing check, but still holding yourself out as a married couple, commingling your accounts, living really as a married couple, and simply file paperwork to hide the fact that you're married to a convict, you could get in some serious trouble.
You sure could. I want to go back to your point for a second, that you called this a semi-successful marriage. I don't necessarily want to disagree with you. I just want to raise the point. So this is a marriage that started when she was
34?
34, and he was 13.
13, I believe.
When their relationship started.
Yeah.
At 14, he impregnated her. They had the child. She was incarcerated for a period of time. She gets out. It wasn't a long period of time. Gets out and can't keep her hands off Billy, so they go and have sex again. When
in a car, apparently.
In a car when he is now 15, 16.
Yeah.
She is found in the car having sex with him and put back in jail for 7 years, gets out. He is now of age, so they get lawfully married, and they have a 12-year marriage together.
Yeah.
And they have a product of they had another child. I think I'm sorry.
They have 2 adult children.
They have 2 adult children, both of which were conceived before he was 18.
I think they'd have to be, yeah.
Yeah, no, and the second one was actually conceived that night, apparently in the car, they think. So anyway.
What a wonderful story to tell your children.
It's so interesting to then plug that into, that square peg into the round hole of a semi-successful marriage that lasted 12 years and resulted in 2 children. And they actually seem, if the story is right, the only reason filing for separation is for the weed, the rights to grow weed. It seems like it may still be a successful marriage.
Yeah, I think we have, we've talked about it on this show before. We have certain mores here. They are not shared globally. There are places where the age of consent is considerably lower, and a 13-year-old who is pubescent and has an attraction to women could be considered in certain cultures to be ready to enter into these kind of relationships.
What if they don't have an attraction to women?
Or as an attraction to someone. Oh, jeez. I was only talking about the Laternos. Can we move on to the next question?
Next one is from Vinny Flores. Can Trump pardon Kushner if it comes down to it? And more importantly, can't Trump pardon himself?
The answer to the first question is yes. Answer to the second question is no. The Constitution is pretty clear. The president can pardon anybody for federal crimes. And what Jared Kushner, first of all, let's say he's not really being accused of a crime. He's being accused of having sort of strange lines open to Russian officials, which would not be illegal.
That's right. And is, in fact, pretty common, apparently, from what I've heard. To have diplomatic relations that are through back channels is something that dates back to the Kennedys.
It's only raising eyebrows here because you're plugging that puzzle piece into a grand sort of, I'm mixing metaphors here, but there's a lot of smoke here, a lot of relationships that seem untoward between the Russian officials and the Trump candidacy and the Trump White House, and that's why it seems untoward. But nevertheless, if he were to do something illegal, yes, Donald Trump can pardon anybody he wants, including his chief advisor and his son-in-law. But the Constitution is equally clear that you cannot pardon yourself, and you certainly can't pardon yourself for impeachable crimes.
Yep.
But you can pardon family members?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, all right.
And you know what? I bet you it's happened.
Yeah. Do you think that Jimmy maybe pardoned?
I don't know if
Billy Carter.
Oh, but Billy Carter possibly.
Maybe, or Roger Clinton,
like the petticoat affair, and with Andrew Jackson.
Yeah, there could be.
That's petticoat affair.
We'll have to look into
Andrew
that.
Jackson?
Yes.
Yes. All right.
All right. Last one up is from Tyler. Lots of true crime shows and movies are being made right now. If you guys could make a true crime series or movie, what case or crime would it be about?
It's really interesting you ask that. We're actually pondering sort of doing some podcast work here on old crimes and sort of really examining the biggest cases in American history. Yep. We're talking about Patty Hearst. It's a fascinating one.
Yeah, that's a big one for me. The biggest one for me is the Lufthansa heist. I'm a big fan of Goodfellas, and it's a central component of that movie, Henry Hill.
But it was fictionalized. It was fictionalized to a great degree in Goodfellas. It would be interesting to do a real case study on the Lufthansa heist.
Yep.
There's also Roman Polanski, and there's
the Menendez brothers.
The Menendez brothers. OJ's been done to death, but it's still the most fascinating one that's out there.
It really is.
But there's some great stories. Lorena Bobbitt.
What
happened there?
You can't beat Lorena Bobbitt. It's still to this day chilling. Like, just the name sort of makes your arm hair
literally
stand up.
chilling.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, and that is it from Real Time.
All right. Thanks very much, everybody. We will see you again next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for watching. If you want more nerdy deep dives into the legal side of celebrity news, hit our subscribe button right here.
And check out our previous episodes over here.